Welcome to our virtual interview in celebration of Hispanic Heritage Month and to the launch of the third set of the Macmillan and Hispanic Star Children Book Series. My name is Ana Saldarriaga, and I am the Chief Operating Officer of We Are All Human, an NGO dedicated to advance equity for all, particularly for Hispanics in the United States. Today, we are incredibly honored to be joined by Dr. Ellen Ochoa, an inspirational figure who has achieved remarkable success in the field of space exploration. As an engineer, she is a personal role model to me and many others, given that she is the first Latina astronaut who made history in 1993 when she went to space. She logged nearly 1,000 hours in orbit studying the Earth ozone layer. Later, she made history again when she became the first Latina and second female director of the NASA Johnson Space Center. In We Are All Human, we are guided by a deep belief that if you can see it, you can be it. And therefore, it is my absolute honor to introduce Dr. Ellen Ochoa, a true inspiration for all of us. Thank you, Ellen, so much for being with us. I hope that you're feeling as excited as I am.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be with you today.
Fantastic. So for today, we have a few questions where we would like to know more about your experience and your journey. So let's start with a little bit of introduction and background on how did you get started in the field of space exploration? What inspired you to pursue this career path?
Well, I think it was really what was going on with NASA in the 1970s and 1980s. NASA was starting to develop the space shuttle. And there were other things going on in the country, like the women's rights movement. And of course, that followed the civil rights movement. So when NASA selected the first astronaut class that would train specifically for this new spacecraft, the space shuttle, it was the first time that they selected women and the first time they selected astronauts of color. That was 1978. And I was about halfway through my undergraduate years. So that was really a huge milestone because that was a career that was simply not open to women prior to that. And then I graduated in physics and I went on to graduate school. I was looking at a career as a research engineer. And near the end of my first year in graduate school is when the space shuttle flew for the first time. So very different kind of spacecraft that had ever flown before. The crews were larger. They were looking at, 5 to 7 people at a time. And the space shuttle could do so many different things, but a lot of what it was going to be used for was research, which is exactly, where my interests were lying. So it just became something that really captured my attention. And then 2 years after that first flight is when Sally Ride flew. In fact, this year is the 40th anniversary of her flight, the first American woman in space. And not only was she a woman, but she'd been a physics major like me. She had gone to Stanford, which is where I was currently getting my PhD. And I think I really needed to see all those things in common for me to think about, well, maybe this is something that, I could do. And the idea just really excited me.
That sounds great. And then I know that a lot of people dream of becoming astronauts and explore the space and, all these dreams that at some point feel so far away from what is achievable. Who or where did you find support to follow this dream?
Well, I have to say, I didn't really talk to that many people about it, but I had a very good friend in grad school, and he definitely encouraged me to, apply and do whatever I could. I talked to either one or both of my PhD advisors, and they absolutely were supportive. Talked to my mom. She was happy for me to pursue whatever interested me. She'd always, been a big supporter of that. But when I sent in my application, which is as soon as I got my PhD, that's when I applied to NASA. I honestly really never expected to hear anything because, so many people apply, thousands of people. And it was hard to picture how they were going to pick my application out of all of those others. But fortunately, I'd just gotten a PhD, and so I had a number of good job opportunities as a research engineer, and so that's really what I went off to do.
That sounds amazing. Did you face any obstacle in the process, or it all happened in the way that you expected it to happen?
Well, I think the obstacles were kind of actually even before I thought about applying, right? Because there are just so few people like me who were studying science and engineering at that time. And I was often, certainly not encouraged to do it. Although fortunately, I did have people who encouraged me. For example, when I was an undergrad at San Diego State and I was trying to decide what to major in, I'd taken a lot of math and I thought, well, I should try out some of the subjects that actually use the math that I'm working on. And so I went to talk to an engineering professor, and it was clear he wasn't at all interested in having me in his department. He was like, well, I think we had a woman come through here once, but it's a really difficult course to study, and I don't think you'd be interested in what we do here. Fortunately, I also went to talk to a professor in the physics department, and I got a much different reception. He was glad to hear I was interested in physics. He told me about different kinds of careers people could have if they majored in physics, which was actually really important because I didn't have a good idea of what those might be. And when he found out, that I was finishing up the calculus series, he said, well, that's great. You already learned the language of physics. And if you start into our classes, next semester, you'll be able to concentrate on the concepts, and most students will be trying to learn those things simultaneously. So, with that, I thought, well, I'll give physics a try, and that's really what started me out of my path. And I could say there's a few other stories I could tell of similar things where I ran into people who just didn't think either women or people of color in general should be in the field. But fortunately, I always had people who supported me as well.
That is great to know, because yes, I think that you represent both what it's like to be a Latina and a woman in a field like space, which is not very common. So it's very interesting to hear about those obstacles and challenges that you mentioned, but also good to see how it all worked out for you. On that note, can you describe what it's like, or what it was like, to be the first Hispanic woman in space, and what impact do you think that it had on the representation on this field?
Well, in terms of training and preparing for it, I don't know that it was any different for me than anybody else. I mean, obviously, I wanted to do as good a job as I could and be really prepared. So I worked hard at it and studied and made sure that I knew my stuff, which is, I think, the same way every other astronaut prepares for flight. I think where I really noticed a difference was after I returned. And then I had, certainly lots of invitations from schools or educational groups around the country who in particular maybe had a high Hispanic population and, wanted to get a message across to the kids that they were working with. So really ever since then, and it's been 30 years now since my first flight, I've had the opportunity to do a lot of outreach. And I think that's added sort of a whole dimension to my career as an astronaut and later on as a leader at NASA, that being the first Latina in space really helped promote.
Amazing. And has your personal cultural heritage and personal values influenced your career trajectory and leadership style as an engineer, as an astronaut, as a director? It can be both, like positively or not so positively.
It's always a little bit hard to say because I don't know how I would have been if I'd had a different heritage, right? So it's a little bit hard to compare. But certainly I would say in my family, education was important. And, just always trying to do the best you could at whatever you did. Those were certainly things that I grew up with and that I've applied throughout my career. I do think, that when you grow up, or especially as you're in school or early in your career, and there are certain people who just sort of don't feel like you should be there, you kind of have these experiences of being ignored in a meeting or discounted or just, not sort of being given the benefit of the doubt. And I do think we can then use that as we go forward in our work, about really being conscious about inclusion and letting other people helping them feel respected and valued. And that's going to help. Not only is it going to help me to help be like that, but it helps the whole organization, because if everybody there has this feeling of inclusion, they're going to engage more fully in the work of the organization and help it be successful. So I think you can sort of draw on those experiences and use it to make your organization or to help, accomplish the mission that you're working on.
Yeah. I know for a fact that a lot of women, particularly women of color, Latinas, as an example, face a lot of obstacles when it comes to adapting to working places because of multiple reasons. One is the gender, but the other one is the cultural nuances when it comes to communication and all the things that might come with their Latinidad. However, can you provide advice on how these type of professionals can flip the script and use their Latinidad as a superpower?
Well, one thing I'll mention is just some of the great work that our employee resource groups have done at Johnson Space Center, and I'll talk specifically about our Hispanic employee resource group. So we sort of empower and encourage these organizations to look around and say, what is it that you can do that will help the organization as a whole, while also providing these engaging and leadership opportunities for people in the employee resource group. So our Hispanic employee resource group did a number of things. First, we had some visitors from the newly formed Mexican Space Agency come visit Johnson Space Center. And our Hispanic employee resource group served as translators and took them around to all different kinds of, the labs and the operational and the training facilities that we have, and really served as that liaison. And then another way that I think they made a really big contribution is the International Space Station program puts out a 2-minute video every week called Space to Ground. And it basically just reviews, hey, what happened in space this week on the International Space Station? And the Hispanic Employee Resource Group wanted to actually translate that into Spanish and re-record it in Spanish and make it available, not only in the US, but around Latin America as well. And it was such a hit that the space station program made it permanent, not just a sort of a pilot program. And so this is a way of getting the word out about space exploration, about what NASA's doing, the International Space Station, that, even I didn't think about on my own, but it was the members of our Hispanic Employee Resource Group who really came up with that idea. So I think there are lots of things out there where, you can use your thinking, your cultural heritage and background to say, how can I actually add something to this organization that wouldn't have been there without me and my background?
Totally. And we're all human. We are always curious to know how these different experiences look like in different industries. But one thing that we see that happens across industries is a combination of something very similar that you mentioned. Number one is know your power and understand that as Latinos, we are a big contributors to the US across all the industries. So as long as you are aware that you represent a community that is driving growth for the country, I think that you can find in yourself many ways to flip the script.
Yes.
Number two is seek for your community in the forms of ERGs or locally in your family, but make sure that you know that you're not alone, because once you understand that you are one Latino out of many, then you can use that as your superpower. And then once you start working in a community, many ideas will start emerging, like the translation initiatives, like the inclusion in policies initiatives, like recruitment and onboarding practices and
Right.
acceleration career practices. So to everyone who's listening, you have many ways to flip the script. And again, across all industries, we have one example from the space world. So if we can make it there, we can make it anywhere. But then actually closing on this chapter, how do you see the space industry changing in the upcoming years and decades? And how can influential women like yourself can promote inclusion in this workspace?
Well, I certainly saw the space industry change in the 30 years that I was at NASA. And so you look around, particularly at the workforce at NASA, so much more diverse than it used to be, which is just fantastic for a number of reasons. I think it helps bring in all different kinds of experiences and perspectives to actually solve NASA's challenges, as well as the companies that work in this industry. And also, we need workers, and the workforce is definitely changing. So if we're not really reaching out and not being inclusive, we're going to miss out on all these bright minds. And so I see that absolutely continuing. And as you know, there are so many more companies now involved somehow in space exploration, some of it actually in human spaceflight, but also in many other facets of going to space, utilizing space. And all of these companies are looking for talent. And so I think this is something that has encouraged a lot of the companies really to reach out to communities that haven't been well represented in STEM up till now, because they know they're going to need them more and more as we go into the future. And so I think that bodes well for anybody who's even the slightest bit interested in going into this industry, that we'll see more and more like that. And then I know at NASA, it's not just about hiring in a more diverse workforce. It's about giving them opportunities. It's about making people feel included. At Johnson Space Center, we certainly looked at all of our formal processes, our informal processes. We changed the way that we sort of offered informal processes, instead of just, going to someone, sort of your go-to person to join, to be on a team that might be center-wide or NASA-wide. We allow people to raise their hands, and you really use it as development opportunities and get more people involved. We have our senior leaders serving on an Innovation and Inclusion Council. And in all of our leaders' sort of performance plans, we have leadership competencies that are related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we're saying this is an important part of you being a leader. And really contributing to NASA in the future. And I know there are aerospace companies who are doing very much of the same thing. So I just see it as being more and more available to people in the future. And it's on a good trajectory. We're definitely not where we need to be yet, but certainly headed that way.
Absolutely. I remember watching this documentary where I don't know exactly where was the point where NASA discovered that the suits to go to space were not suitable for women.
Yeah, right.
And there was like a huge setback, and I was like, a very basic but prime example of the importance of representation across gender, but also across cultures and many others. So great to hear about the progress that you've seen, but also great to understand the progress that is yet to be achieved. And this is an invitation again for everyone listening, consider a career in STEM and considering pushing that representation forward. Now, let's move into the next section of perception, representation, and role modeling. For me, they play a crucial role in empowering communities, because I feel that recognizing the importance of supporting particularly Hispanics in the US, we at We Are All Human Foundation have launched the Hispanic Star. And this is a dynamic platform dedicated to advance Hispanics in many ways. But the channels that we use usually include initiatives like books, international events, campaigns, and many more. go to our website and understand a little bit more about our scope of work. But overall, Hispanic Star aims to become the symbol of representation for the Hispanic community. Under that objective, imagine a world where the presence of Hispanics is visible everywhere, such as a star on the rocket that is going to the moon, or a powerful visual representation of their contributions and presence across various domains, whether a rocket or a brand package. So if we manage to unify the community under this one symbol, we hope to highlight a lot of role models that represent that symbol. So in that spirit, I would love to know, can you tell us more about the importance that role models and representation has played in your life?
Oh, well, absolutely. Yeah, I mentioned what a huge deal it was when NASA selected the first women, 6 women in the class of 1978, and then to see them start flying was just really important to me. I mean, it really was the first time that I started to think seriously about space exploration as a potential career. And I think there's been all kinds of studies that really say, if you're trying to interest, especially younger students, middle school age, for example, in STEM careers, there's really kind of 3 main things that you need to have. You need to have role models. You need to have mentors that work directly with the students or that they have a chance to interact with. And then you need some kind of hands-on activities that get kids really involved in understanding that STEM is about curiosity, it's about creativity, new discoveries, solving challenges. And when you have those ingredients, you can get people involved in STEM.
Totally. For me, also resilience. I believe it's one of the main things that I hope everybody gets to explore once they're in this career, because with resilience, I managed to gain most of the things that I have managed to get in my career, and I'm guessing so do you too,
Yeah.
In persistence. So as a prominent figure within the Hispanic community, because again, that I'm sure that you know, but in case you do not know, you are one of our biggest role models. How do you see the cultural contributions of Hispanics shaping the broader American identity?
Well, I think it's part about understanding that there are people with many different kinds of backgrounds and experiences, but we want everyone to be able to contribute fully and to be sort of recognized and respected and valued fully. And I think it's often, members of communities who haven't felt like that really have to push for that change, because they're the ones that really see it and feel it and understand how important it is for people to reach their full potential, to feel like that. So it's really about getting involved in all kinds of fields, right? Not just STEM, but that happens to be where my expertise is and where I feel like I can make the most difference in terms of introducing this to other people.
Yeah, but it's also one of the industries where we need the most representation of Latinos. If we want to reflect the population of the country, at least 19% of the people in STEM should be Latino, which it currently is not the case.
Absolutely, yes.
So I do hope that particularly, again, Latino women that are listening this consider this career as a path of choice. Great. So now I wonder, what do you think could be the next steps for improving Hispanic representation everywhere? What do you think it could give us a push, or that it's missing in order for us to increase this representation?
Well, certainly, first of all, I love what your organization is doing. We are all human. A lot of it is shining a spotlight, right? Getting the word out. It's about more attention on role models, in various different areas and fields. And it's about sort of also recruiting people who can be mentors to work with, in particular, students, so that they have a chance, while there's still a lot of options for what their future might be like, to take the kinds of classes that will give them future options, and to understand what other characteristics are important. You mentioned resilience. I think another important one for certainly for my career is teamwork. Astronauts have to be both good team members and team leaders. And often, people don't talk about that a lot, especially as you're going through school. It's just about sort of learning the material, but there's a lot more to being, successful in this field than just learning the material. So I think it's an eye to how do we sort of inject that earlier on, either into education or into extracurricular activities that people can participate in that give them those skills. And then, just seeing people in space, and we're seeing it more and more, because of there's being more options for how people get to space. The first Mexican woman who went to space on a suborbital flight, Blue Origin, Katya Chazareta. She's out there, talking to lots of different audiences as well. We kind of follow each other on social media, although we haven't met. And so I think she's seen what an opportunity that she has for reaching out as well.
Totally. And I think that in addition to shining the spotlight and people be willing to be on the spotlight, because unfortunately we have seen that, at least in the Hispanic community, there are people that still is not ready to be on the spotlight and embrace their Latinidad. And so once those two elements happen, there is one third that I will add to your suggestions, and is to make sure that the members of the community share those stories, because it's one thing to spread awareness and it's one thing to create these platforms, but we need to talk about it. Like, did you hear the interview with Ellen Ochoa? It's really good. You should share it. Did you see this book? And make sure that it becomes a ripple effect in the same way that we share things that inspire us. So I do believe that everyone in the community has a role to play, not only at willing to listen and to understand, but also willing to replicate.
Yeah, completely agree. Good point.
Yeah. Then I wonder, in terms of like perspectives and advice, how your experience as an astronaut shape your perspective of the world in general, and particularly about inclusivity.
Well, I will say certainly seeing the Earth from space is just an amazing experience. And given the fact that we orbited the Earth every hour and a half during, all my 4 shuttle flights, you really see it much more as one interconnected system. People on the ground, of course, but the atmosphere, the land, the oceans, how we're really all sharing this one planet. And yet it's humans that have made all these divisions and sort of tend to make categories that really don't make any sense in terms of either our own futures or the future of the planet itself. So I think that's very powerful. And I think there are a lot more ways to share that experience now, even for people, obviously the vast majority of people who don't go into space, but just all the social media, all the astronauts who go up to space now are either posting things, on their own accounts on various social media or through NASA accounts, lots of photos, lots of video, lots of descriptions of what they're actually trying to accomplish in space. So I think we have a better way of communicating that than when I was in space. But the other thing that I mentioned is, what I really noticed the longer I was at NASA through my 4 flights and then through my leadership opportunities, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, was the power of a team. When you have a group of people who are passionate about trying to accomplish something that's difficult and they're really working hard toward it, it's just amazing. I mean, it makes you feel like there's nothing that we can't accomplish if we work together. And that is something that has really stayed with me through my time at NASA.
Totally. And it's very interesting that you share that perspective, particularly because I don't think that a lot of people know I don't think you know that the reason why our foundation is called We Are All Human, even though it's very heavily focused on Hispanics, is precisely because of that believe that in the earth we are all connected, and it doesn't really matter what is your ethnicity or background. We are all human. We are part of the same human race team, and we understand that together and collectively we must drive progress together. Yes, we do have a focus for the Hispanic community for multiple reasons, but it's something that, again, from your perspective and from our perspective, even coming from different places, it's the exact same. Thank you for that. Now, you've been a strong advocate for education and encouraging young people, especially girls and minorities, to pursue STEM in fields. Why is this important to you?
Well, I think we've talked a lot about how the aerospace industry in general, but certainly many other industries as well, want and need to take advantage of all the talent that is out there. And if you're not encouraging communities that haven't been participating in nearly the numbers that they should have, then you're missing out on a lot of talent. But of course, from my own experience, I had such a wonderful career that was very personally rewarding, challenging and rewarding. And I would love to see other Latinas be able to have that kind of career where they enjoy the work that they do. They feel that it's important, that it's benefiting people around the earth. I think those are things that actually all humans want and strive for. But in many cases, Latinas just don't have exposure to the full range of how they might achieve that. And I'd certainly like to get the word out about STEM.
Yes, I think that I would love to dive deeper. Besides exposure, do you think that there are other obstacles that are preventing Latinos and Latinas to get into the field?
Well, you certainly still do run into people who, they look at somebody like me or like you, and they don't see a scientist or engineer, right? And for that reason, they're often, usually unconsciously, just sort of trying to discourage and, send somebody down a different path. So that absolutely does still exist, which is why it's so important, I think, for role models and mentors to be there, to be on the other side, right, of supporting and encouraging. Certainly, if you're talking about higher education, there are financial barriers. I think we all understand that. But I will say there are also opportunities. There's scholarship, there's fellowships, there's a lot of companies offering paid internships to get people started in these fields. So it may not be something that students know a lot about, but that's another thing that's important to talk about. It's not that you have to have, the financial means up front to go into higher education. There are often other ways that will help support your education.
Yeah. From my perspective, one thing that I notice is every time that I say that I'm an engineer, people tend to assume like, oh, that's so hard, I could never. And I'm like, if I can do it, believe me, anyone can. And I do think that the first barrier to overcome is your own beliefs and your own ambition. And once you have that clear, that again, whoever is listening to this interview, that if you or anyone you know has even this slight curiosity, just explore it. By exploring, you're not making a decision, but definitely you're giving yourself a chance. And I think that is something that, I especially for women, I feel that it's holding them back. They feel that they're not as this as this other person, or they're not as this. And that should never be your guiding process for decision making.
Well, exactly. And that's a good point. And, probably I should point out that certainly when I was in school and earlier in my career, there were often times where I thought like, oh, I just don't know nearly as much as the other people in this class or the people around me. And certainly, had this feelings of like, am I going to be able to do this? Am I going to be able to do well? I think that's pretty common. So, for people listening, you shouldn't think like, oh, unless you have the full confidence that you can do this, you shouldn't try it. I think most people of whatever background have that feeling at some point or other. So it's just about, it's about perseverance. It's about working hard at each step along the way. I found when I was in school that, going to professors' office hours and asking questions, they actually encourage that, because that way they know you're actually interested in what you're learning, and you're trying to learn what they're trying to teach, which is certainly gratifying from a teacher's perspective. And I did a lot of that. And there's often, other things available, tutoring, or there's student chapters of the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers, for example, that get together in study groups. So I think there's lots of ways to move forward, even when you're in a tough spot or you're having difficulty. And that's just part of learning. You shouldn't feel like, oh, this is only happening to me. That's very common. That's really how you learn.
Yeah. And I like to, again, dive deeper there, because I feel that a lot of people, when think of STEM, they think of the challenges and all whatever things the broader society has positioned or filled. But then I don't feel that there's a lot of stories on how rewarding it can be at the same time. Do you have any anecdotes from your student years or your years working? So some of those moments that were like, oh, this is great. Because I personally have many, but I'm sure that yours are way better. You already mentioned the one seeing the Earth, which I don't think anything can top that. But besides that, any other rewarding moments?
Well, going back to before I was selected as an astronaut, certainly there were milestones along the way. Even in graduate school, when my first paper got published, where I was the principal author, when I started going to conferences in my field, which was optical information processing, and actually presenting papers. Those were steps along the way that, even a couple years before that, I probably couldn't really picture myself doing. And so I think it's all about building on what you've done before. And then you see yourself accomplishing these milestones that had seemed, really hard and maybe not possible, even 2 or 3 years before that. And then I think, there's lots of different kinds of science and engineering careers. You've had your own career. I think you helped develop products, and being part of a product that's been developed that's actually available now, that's a huge win, and a huge milestone.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. One of mine was when I joined product design engineer because I wanted to create products for people with disabilities. And then one of the audiences that I feel that they're not very seen is kids with disabilities, because they grow so fast. So it's very difficult to make a scalable model. And we made this wheelchair that put them in vertical position that allows them to still play basketball in case that they have upper mobility. And we went from like an idea to the design process to the construction. And then I was in charge of the electronics of the whole system. And I can't remember how many sleepless nights I spent at the university. My mother was bringing me food to the university because I was not going home. But the first time that chair worked, I remember, it's just a feeling that I can't describe, because it's not only a sense of accomplishment, it's a sense of what it's possible. Right. And I feel that STEM is one of those unique fields that challenge what is possible. And therefore, again, I just recommend it to anyone.
Exactly. Your story is perfect. And I think that's what a lot of people feel is really rewarding about STEM, about solving challenges that you see can really benefit people.
Totally. Now, I don't want this to end, but we're reaching into the last section about Hispanic Heritage Month and all of the things that are coming. So I know that you're working on a book series dedicated to STEM. Can you tell us more about it and what inspired you to create it? Even though I think that it's pretty clear at this point.
Yeah, so actually it wasn't something I was thinking about at all, but there is a publisher called Little Libros, and they focus exclusively on bilingual children's books, so English, Spanish children's books. And they realized they didn't have very much about STEM in the books that they had published to date. And so they asked me if I would be interested in writing a series of 5 books one for each of the letters of STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. And as I said, even though it wasn't something I'd thought about, I realized, well, this is a way to actually do outreach for a younger group than I normally am doing outreach to. And it's also a way to get families involved, because when you think about, well, who's reading these books to young kids? It's often family members, siblings, parents, grandparents. It may also be teachers and librarians, but a lot of it is in a family setting. And, you may have grandparents that really can only relate to the Spanish portion of the book, and other family members who do English. And it's a way of getting both concepts and vocabulary across, starting from when kids are really little, when the words maybe don't mean a whole lot, but the wonderful illustrations done by Citlali Reyes will capture their imagination. And then as they get older, hopefully the other layers will come in. So far, the science one is published. It's called We Are All Scientists, Todos Somos Científicos. And it really is about saying, science starts with curiosity about the world around you, which seems pretty simple, but I don't think that was a concept that I thought about when I was young, that this is what science is about, and then describes different kinds of scientists. And then fall of 2023, this fall, 2 more will come out on technology and engineering. And then next spring of 2024, the final 2 on arts and math will come out.
Fantastic. I cannot wait to read them personally, particularly because, I fully agree with the curiosity part. It's, for me, when I started the engineering process, and then I realized, I wonder how this lamp works. I wonder how this chair gets made. I wonder how this car versus this car get designed in order to have different performances. And your world changes. The way that you see things, the way you see materials changes. And that curiosity stays with you forever. So highly encourage everyone to go and read those books and learn from Ellen. And then finally, as a Latina, what does Hispanic Heritage Month means to you? How do you celebrate your heritage and your culture this month and throughout the year?
Well, it's really certainly an opportunity for me to think about my family members who came before me. My dad's parents were Mexican, and grew up there, married there, had some of their first children there, and then emigrated to the U.S. And that's the story for so many people in the U.S. Often it's even more immediate. Their own parents or even themselves may have come to the U.S. And yet, in general, you just don't hear a lot about those stories, or about how they have contributed to the history and the current situation in the U.S. So it's certainly a chance to highlight that. And then for me personally, I have lots of opportunities during Hispanic Heritage Month to reach out to a whole lot of audiences, maybe schools, it may be companies who they may have employee resource groups who are really trying to engage the employees at their companies. But it's just a great opportunity to, again, get the word out about STEM and about role models.
Fantastic. Ellen, this was incredible. I am living so inspired, actually, like not even inspired, like I want to go read books, read them to other people. And I'm just so grateful for you, for the leadership that you have brought to the science field, but also to the Hispanic community. So thank you again for joining us today. I now hope that everybody understands that in addition to Ellen's book, she has been featured as one of all role models for the Hispanic Star Children book series. So this interview is just a quick snapshot of her story. And therefore, if you want to go and dive deeper, I suggest that you go and buy the book, read the book, and share the book. We need more people to know about her incredible story, and we count on all of you to make that happen. And then, Ellen, we wish you all the best in your future projects, and we look forward to seeing all the legacy that you will continue to achieve in the years to come.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation, and thank you so much for everything that We Are All Human is doing.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for all of you for tuning in and joining the celebration.